Reports say Jimmy Carter, the 39th president of the United States, has passed away at the age of 100. Carter was elected president in 1976 in the wake of Watergate, defeating incumbent Gerald Ford. Carter lost his 1980 bid for re-election to Ronald Reagan in a landslide.
Americans bid farewell yesterday to the country's 39th president, Jimmy Carter, who died at the age of 100.
We'll check in with President Joe Biden, who took some precious time away from his very last taxpayer-funded vacation to commemorate the passing of President Jimmy Carter.
Joe Biden's approval numbers are now the worst of any president, even Jimmy Carter.
Today, America and the world, in my view, lost a remarkable leader. He was a statesman and humanitarian.
He was a sick and depraved man, and now he's dead.
Joe Biden is a disaster, and he will replace Jimmy Carter as the worst president in our lifetime.
Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. He lost the election, and he was put into office because the Russians interfered on his behalf.
I thought Jimmy Carter was the worst president in my lifetime. If God's good to me, I'll be 56 in April. Jimmy Carter is like Ronald Reagan compared to this guy.
You know, I find it humorous for those watching on TV and for those in the balcony. They keep talking about President Trump. They won't talk about the current president, Joe Biden. I'm going to start off with a compliment. He's been able to accomplish being the worst president and has replaced Jimmy Carter as the worst president this country has ever had of all time. And it's because of his policies.
I've been hanging out with Jimmy Carter for over 50 years, it dawned on me. He used to kid me about it, that I was the first national figure to endorse him in 1976.
He's dead. He's dead as a doornail.
And I think to myself, you know, he hated Jimmy Carter because of his policies. And I think that's
Why did he hate Jimmy Carter? What did Jimmy Carter ever do to him?
Well, Jimmy Carter did a lot of things to him, mostly.
What did he do? Did he hurt him? Did he hit him with a billy club or something?
Worst economy in 50 years, except for the last 4 years. This is unbelievable.
Yeah,
Jimmy Carter was
except for the last
president.
4 years. Thank you, George Bush.
President.
Sean Hannity, you believe this president to be what?
He's the worst president we've had in my lifetime. He's the worst president on record, the worst president than Jimmy Carter. This is the worst president America has ever had.
Did he hate George Bush, too?
No, he didn't hate George Bush because George Bush, he agreed with his policies. He completely disagreed with Jimmy Carter's policies. And Jimmy Carter was a horrible president, which you seem to forget. You know, Jeff, do you think Jimmy Carter was a good president? He was one of the worst presidents in history.
So do you believe President Trump is an illegitimate president?
Based on what I just said, which I can't retract.
And Jill and I lost a dear friend. I've been hanging out with Jimmy Carter for over 50 years, it dawned on me.
He's the worst president in the history of our country. He makes Jimmy Carter look great.
Well, I think Bush is probably the worst president in the history of the United States. I always said the worst president was Jimmy Carter. Guess what? Jimmy Carter goes to second place. Barack Obama has been the worst president ever.
Biden is the worst president in history.
People used to say that Jimmy Carter was the worst president, you know, in our lifetime. But I would just say that now people have redefined worst president as Joe Biden.
You know, Jimmy Carter stands as a model of what it means to live a life of meaning and purpose, a life of principle, faith, and humility.
He is the worst president we've had. The only person smiling right now is probably Jimmy Carter because he's now the second worst president of my lifetime, not the first.
And he has now the worst economic record since any president since Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter was a great president in comparison to George W. Bush,
bogus.
in comparison to Ronald Reagan, who destroyed the economic basis of this country, and you know it.
And Jimmy Carter was terrible.
Barack Obama was the worst president since Jimmy Carter, and he is getting ready to be the worst former president since Jimmy Carter. I mean,
well, the worst president in the history of this country is undoubtedly Joe Biden. On economic, domestic, foreign policy, he was abjectly terrible.
Abraham Lincoln. I don't think you're going to get any argument from anybody on that. Yes, he is ranked number one. So who is dead last? Well, for the second time in a row, again, shouldn't be anybody's surprise, Donald J. Trump, the 45th president of the United States, is last.
2 short years. The president has signed a record historic low tax cut. He's ended hundreds of burdensome government regulations. We are now energy independent and the world's largest producer of oil and natural gas. He has also negotiated new trade deals that benefit America with Mexico, Canada, and for the first time in many years, manufacturing jobs are back with a vengeance.
Donald J. Trump, the 45th president of the United States, is last.
Some Biden allies point to a recent survey of historians that Biden ranked the 14th best president in history while putting Trump last. Yet it is Trump, not Biden, who is preparing for his second inauguration on January 20th.
Representative Jackie, are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here.
According to the 538 average, at this point in the presidency, he is the least popular president in the history of polling, with the exception of Jimmy Carter, which is kind of appropriate because he's the worst president since Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden may have served 5 decades apart, but both presidencies ended in economic malaise. And the two were really presidential bookends. Jimmy Carter's presidency ushered in a wave of progressivism, while Joe Biden's failures 50 years later marked the end of progressivism.
Well, I think President Biden has been good. I do not think he's been great, but I definitely do not think he's been horrible. I do not think he's been great, but I definitely do not think he's been horrible.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
It's very delusional. He feels that in all the areas he failed, on the border, on the economy, on crime, on Afghanistan and the Middle East, that if he had doubled down on those failures, they might have succeeded.
I don't know. I think President Biden has been good. I do not think he's been great, but I definitely do not think he's been horrible. But if you think about it, yeah.
So if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black. Oops, stepping on it's black. Anyway. And you ain't black. It's black.
Look back at the Trump years. What got better in this country under Donald Trump? What changed significantly in this country during Donald Trump?
Well, he certainly has done a lot as president, certainly more than a president has in the last 40 or 50 years. And so I do celebrate the accomplishments that he and I have been able to work together on, and beyond what you've named, we should add on to that sickle cell anemia research. So there's a lot of accomplishments under the belt in this administration that really outpaces anything that I've seen in my lifetime. I'll probably leave it right there, though.
What policies did he enact?
You've commended him on his efforts for black Americans when it comes to criminal justice reform, funding for HBCUs, and a strong economy for minorities before the pandemic. But
what policies did he enact?
Now, the administration does deserve credit for criminal justice reform passed in 2018.
That have a long-lasting historical impact on the United States.
And it's been a pretty good year looking back for President Trump and his level of accomplishments. But unfortunately, from the mainstream media at least, we're not hearing a lot about some of these things.
I think his ability to change the way we do allow immigrants to come into our country and seek asylum. We have them now because of President Trump. They have to go to the Mexican side of the border and then go through the entire legal process before they can seek asylum. Before, they would come across, we would have the ability just to say, okay, come back when your court hearing is up, and they would go into the populace. They would never come back, and we'd never see them again, and that allowed millions and millions of people to come here illegally.
Policies that will be mentioned in history books for centuries to come.
During the Obama administration, he essentially shut down oil and gas exploration on federal lands. So this president has had an amazing impact on just our energy resources here in the United States. But imagine the jobs that are being created because of that, high-paying jobs in the energy sector as well.
Nothing. He got nothing.
President-elect Trump has big plans for day one of his new administration. He's promised to get a lot of things done next year, and among them are closing our southern border, deporting illegal migrants, and EV mandates, and increasing energy production. It's a lot to do.
Nothing. He got nothing.
People like to say that Jimmy Carter is the worst president of all time.
Got it completely wrong. Biden will be remembered as being worse than Jimmy Carter because they're talking about gas prices and inflation and how things were bad then and now. But Carter didn't denounce and reject half the country as domestic terrorists. Carter didn't sic the Department of Justice on parents who are trying to fight for their children's education. The list goes on and on.
This poll reveals more bad news for the president. A new CNN poll shows Biden has a worse approval rating on the economy than even Jimmy Carter. The debate, are we now suffering through the worst president in modern history?
Big up this failed policy from 1980 from Jimmy Carter, brought to you by the one and only Jimmy Carter, the second worst president that we've ever had next to Biden.
Sir, what is your fondest memory of Jimmy Carter?
I have a number of them. I guess maybe my fondest memory of Jimmy Carter was when I endorsed him for president. I told him why I was endorsing him, and that it was not only his policies, but his character, his decency.
Jimmy Carter is by far the worst president in history.
Hold on. Have you noticed the labor participation rate?
Yeah, yes.
You know what it is, Juan?
Yes.
You know what? It's the lowest right now since who? Since who?
I don't even
Jimmy
know.
Carter.
All right, so
the other worst president.
I am your voice.
I mean it.